welcome again. Thanks for joining us for today's AI Governance, Risk and Compliance Fundamentals Masterclass. As you know, some of you had joined us a couple of weeks ago for our introductory session, just introducing everybody to high-level concepts, who we are, and again, just to reiterate, at our firm, Ashley and Donahue, we've got a team of legal professionals that are dedicated to helping clients navigating the rapidly evolving and complex landscape of artificial intelligence regulation, and even more than that, it's about risk management these days, risk management and compliance. So there are some jurisdictions, as we went over the last time, that clearly have laws passed and in particular at the state level that we need to be concerned about. Our team has a deep expertise in AI law, also privacy and just regulatory frameworks in general. They work alongside our clients to ensure that you guys can leverage artificial intelligence effectively, while at the same time mitigating those legal and ethical risks. Today's session marks the first of what are, I think, nearly a dozen master classes that we're going to be rolling out over the coming weeks and months. Each session is going to delve deeper into specific areas of AI governance, some covering regulatory developments, best practices, real-world use cases across various industry verticals. Some of the future master classes are going to feature some guest speakers, even industry leaders that'll provide some valuable insights from different perspectives, from the perspective of businesses. So before I hand over the reins to my colleagues, Brian Alexander and Diana James, I do want to extend gratitude to our co-sponsors, the Cloud Communications Alliance, for supporting today's session. Also throw out there, if your organization is interested in co-sponsoring a future masterclass, reach out to us. There's no cost to do so, and we're happy to share our knowledge and to also promote your organization along with ours. Lastly, we encourage your active participation in this session. So the chat window is going to be opened. We are reserving about 10 minutes or so at the end of the webinar to address your questions. So submit them as we go along, and we're going to do our best to answer them in the order received. So again, without further ado, let's get started. Diana, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I'm an attorney with Ashley & Donahue, and my name is Diana James. I assist telecom and other tech clients with regulatory compliance, corporate and intellectual property matters, and I will be moderating today's session and also speak in later master classes, including one on AI in telecom with our partner and head of the AI practice, Susan Duarte. I'm honored to present to you our very own Brian Alexander, who will be teaching our masterclass today. Brian, welcome. Sorry, you're muted.
Would help if I'm not muted. Thank you. So thanks very much, Diana, Jonathan. I appreciate it. I'm of counsel with Ashley & Donahue, practicing in AI, privacy, and cyber law. I have a background in governance, risk management, and compliance, originally working with a risk and compliance consulting and software company, which is one of the reasons why I'm teaching this course. And I also spent 4+ years as GC for an AI engineering company that specialized in trustworthy and responsible AI. The intersection of AI, privacy, security, and the law is really a passion of mine. So excited to bring you this first course in our AI Masterclass series. And I look forward to joining my colleagues, including Diana, and some of the future courses as well. Next slide. This is the first course, and it's aimed really at setting a baseline of fundamental understanding, a foundation really for this series. And over the 5 years that I presented on these subjects, there's been a general increase in the knowledge about AI. So I wanted to kick it off with a real informal poll. If you could, just raise your hands through the down at the bottom of your screen. If you feel like you have a good or very good grasp of AI technology and risks. And I can't see everyone, but let me try to expand out. I see a number of hands up. Thank you. So maybe you can lower your hands if you see the lower hands button, and then give you a moment to lower hands. And then raise your hand if you feel like you don't have sufficient understanding, that you need to know more about AI technology going forward.
Many
And
more people.
Yeah. So it's interesting, but it's changing. It's really important for people to become educated on AI, and so I'm glad this is happening. I'm glad I'm seeing more people that are understanding more, and people, of course, joining us. Of course, especially since generative AI was introduced in the market. But as is the case, really, with any new technology, we need to start with a common understanding of the terminology. And that'll help us to communicate with the vendors, internal development teams, users, and it also provides a basis for understanding the risks and the compliance requirements. So today, what we're going to do is lay the foundation. We'll do a brief history and survey of AI technology and some of the terminology. We'll discuss some of the fundamental use cases, and we'll introduce AI governance frameworks and AI risk management and compliance, which are all, of course, very closely related. Next slide. Thanks. So this slide shows a common business model with the resources that are available to achieve business objectives. You've got people, process, and technology. And on the one hand, AI is software and data. So it is another technology that can be used to achieve objectives. But we all know that AI is a little different. It has unique risks, security, privacy, reputational risks, and of course, compliance risks. And this term socio-technical has been coined to describe AI, or they've been described as socio-technical systems, more accurately, because they combine the social aspects and the technical aspects. It's a computational tool, and it's a socio-technical tool that integrates social and technical aspects to make predictions. And if you think about it, the data used to train systems may include personal information about data subjects, individuals, groups. Rules programmed in the model were created by humans, and they bring their own biases and interests. AI systems, of course, touch very personal areas of people's lives nowadays, and they may make decisions that impact fundamental rights of individuals. So that's where that really comes from. Next slide. Okay, so here we're looking at where AI fits in with data science and with computer science. Data science is a new science. That is, in science, is the study of the structure of the physical world, observation, experimentation, testing theories against evidence. These are all what science is. And really, there was no data science as a course of study until the 2010s. Before that, you had statisticians, you had degrees in advanced business analytics. Now, universities all over the world have data science programs, of course. And so quite interesting how that evolution has happened. And I'm sure that some people could take issue with the Venn diagram, the size of those circles, or the overlap, or maybe I could have carved out probability or statistics in that Venn diagram. But the key points here are that AI is a technology closely related to data science and data analytics and big data, and machine learning is an AI tool or technique. Deep learning is a particular application of machine learning. So that is using deep neural networks. And we'll, of course, come back to a lot of this, but we're just trying to get some of the vocabulary and get the definition down. Generative AI uses deep learning as well as other tools and techniques. So, but deep learning is fundamental to this new revolution in generative AI. When I first started teaching this course, I started teaching AI CLE, and I would look at the definitions in Merriam-Webster and in Oxford for intelligence, the ability to learn, to understand, to deal with new or trying situations. And the definition is important because it'll dictate whether a system is subject to regulation in a lot of cases. Whether a system is AI will dictate certain risks, including the compliance risks. And, for example, we've seen false advertising, we've seen unfair trade practice cases where companies claim to be using AI, but they actually were not. And also in cases where companies were making overblown claims about what AI could do that couldn't be substantiated. So a baseline definition is important. And this question of what is AI has been debated, and it's important for us to understand that because it's not always that clear cut. But I mean, I've had this same conversation with over beers with people who have real experience in data science and AI engineers, going back and forth on this subject. But some of those questions are: does AI include simple pattern recognition of large data sets? As an example, the Colorado AI Act excludes cybersecurity, among some other things, from the definition of high risk. And I've been asked many times, why is that the case? Cybersecurity is pretty high risk area, but a lot of these cyber uses have been around for a while. They involve pattern recognition in massive sets of security logs, endpoint logs, and these are added capabilities in cyber defenses. So, the detection of these anomalies in these large data sets are things that humans would not be able to do or recognize on their own. So that's an important distinction. And people also question whether AI includes robotic process automation that's embedded in workflows, and particularly if there's no learning component to the system. And that's an important factor because it's generally agreed that AI systems are learning systems. And of course, we consider a computer system that performs those kinds of tasks that require human intelligence to be AI, like visual perception, speech recognition, language translation, all of those things. So this definition that's on the screen from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development has really been widely accepted. And the key here is the system infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs. And outputs can include predictions, content, recommendations, decisions, but in reality, all AI systems make predictions. So generative AI predicts the next word group, sentence in a text output. A prediction becomes a decision, and this is important for compliance reasons, when action is taken on it. A loan is approved or denied. An offer is made to a customer based on an AI system recommendation to prevent churn, to prevent customer churn. So the OECD definition also highlights that AI can vary in its level of autonomy. Is a human involved in the loan decision, and to what degree? Does the AI system make decision regarding the loan without human input? Or possibly human intervention only occurs upon some escalation trigger? And now we have definitions of AI in the regulations, in the law, statutes. So the Colorado AI Act defines high risk AI. The New York City Automated Employment Decision Tool defines AI tools used in employment. The National AI Initiative, which is in 15 USC Chapter 119, defines AI in Section 9401 in a way that's very similar to this OECD definition. So we'll look more at these definitions in detail in the future courses. But if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So this is a sample of a life cycle for an AI system, and it's different from a typical software life cycle. Like I said, AI is software and databases and a number of different tools and techniques. I'm just going to point out a few highlights here. One, ethical choices can arise at any stage in the life cycle. And one example is just at inception, decisions being made regarding the training data to be used and how that data will be pre-processed. I'll give you a quick example of missing data. You probably had a spreadsheet where there was a blank cell, and then you had to make some kind of decision. What do I do to address that? And data scientists come across that same problem, of course, and they have many methods that deal with the missing data or outlier data or other data issues. One way to deal with it is to just delete it. And maybe the model still can achieve acceptable accuracy, but that outlier data is representative potentially of an individual, maybe in a protected class. Maybe it's a health record of someone with a rare disease. So the implications of that data and how that's treated, there's ethical choices in that. And that's part of what we need to understand where these things arise. Another here is the process of splitting data between training, validation, and test sets. That requires consideration. Simple example, if the data used for both training and testing is the same, then the test results should be 100% correct because the data used to train is exactly the same as the data used to test. And there are a lot of different considerations for splitting data, but just as an example, depending on how it's the test and training data split, how the model is created, unwanted bias can be introduced into the trained model. So again, areas where risk can arise. Continuous learning, again, we talked about the learning aspect, that creates unique risks. Systems can learn in real time. They can be supplemented with additional data sets, such as new expert knowledge. ChatGPT didn't know about legal ethics, and then all of a sudden it did know about legal ethics because people behind the scenes realized this was a hole in the knowledge, or maybe that was a planned thing to introduce that. And even if it means understanding, this is an ethical problem I can't respond to, and providing that output. But when there's continuous learning, validation, and monitoring of outputs become critical. So these are all things we'll dig into deeper in later courses, but want to introduce it. And here's another example that I think is really highlights some of what we're talking about here. It's Microsoft Tay, which was released in 2016, and it was one of the first automated Twitter chatbots that learned from interactions with the users. Where the problems arose were when there were not sufficient guardrails on this system. And that resulted in this chatbot becoming increasingly racist, misogynistic, and adversarial with some of the users, based on really some of the users feeding information with bad intentions and teaching the system. And this caused reputational harm to Microsoft. They had to quickly pull it down from public use. More to this story.
Wow, this really shows how risky it may be to just let AI learn on its own without any guardrails, and how important high quality training data is. And Tay's example also shows how AI systems are often influenced by bias in the modern world from which it learned. I wonder how Tay would have behaved if that technology was available and trained back in the day. But wait, it was available to an extent. Brian, would you like to tell us about how it all started?
Yeah, so next slide, please. Thanks. Yeah, this is a slide that's packed with information. I am going to go through it fairly quickly. And thank you, Diana, because the point being here, there was an evolution. And yeah, this is something that Microsoft could have foreseen, but they didn't, and part of that's being first on the market. So we won't go too deep into the history, but there's a few points that should be made. Alan Turing was involved first in breaking the Enigma. He was during World War II. Maybe some people are familiar with that. But in 1950, he asked, "Can machines think?" And that is considered a milestone in AI development. And John McCarthy, also credited with coining the term artificial intelligence. He is considered one of the grandfathers of AI. And, one of the things that is interesting is a lot of these systems early on were built to play games, and probably you all remember seeing all of the games. Those were a lot of the things that were in the news back during some of the years listed here. And one of the reasons is that games are really a great domain to teach these systems. And that's one of the reasons there was early traction there, because they can play many games over and over, and a simple reward system can be created for system training. And so, really part of the story here is that AI has been around for a while, and it has just taken an evolution to get to this point. For example, automated trading systems, they've been around for as long as computers have been connected to the exchanges. Neural networks also were conceived years ago, but it wasn't until the 2010s that they could be operationalized. And Jeffrey Hinton is mentioned here because, for one, he's another one that's very famous in this space, and particularly with neural networks. He won a Nobel Prize last year for his work in artificial neural networks. And he has really been instrumental at the University of Toronto in making deep learning a reality and now spread all across the globe. And by the way, he's also one of the people who signed a letter saying that Elon Musk should be removed from the UK's Royal Society. So that's sort of a different issue. But I used to get the question all the time, why now? Why is this happening now? And it is important to understand because all these technologies are so interconnected. But some of these AI techniques, regression, decision tree, they've been around for a while, and you probably are familiar with them if you took some business courses before. But the ability to use machine learning with those techniques and these advancements in neural networks are really the things that have been the accelerant in advancing AI technology. That said, if I remove any of the bullet points on this list, then this revolution in AI does not happen in the same way that it's unfolding now. And really, in some ways, generative AI is the culmination of this, the large language model, the LLM, and the large multimodal model, LMM, which encompasses, other images and other things. And of course, one of the big things and advancements now is these code systems that can generate automated code or check code. So, but to be clear, all of these AI techniques have their place. Quick background. When I came out of college, I was an engineer working with industrial equipment and pumps, fans, chillers, and the amount of data that was available from this equipment was massive at that time. The sensors, the data that we could pull from them, but there was limited storage, compute. There wasn't a cloud at that point. I'm dating myself, and the integration wasn't there. So the data just was sent to a log, or maybe it wasn't even recorded. And that's all changed. Cloud computing, big data, et cetera. All these advancements have sparked this AI revolution. So now I want to talk a little bit about some of the basic terminology, and these distinctions really do become important when you're evaluating AI risks and trying to understand the compliance requirements. As mentioned, AI systems make predictions. Predictions become decisions when some action is taken based on the prediction. And later we'll talk more about autonomy and concepts like human in command and human in the loop. But here's a little preview. Human in the loop must affirmatively take action before a decision is made. So the human presses the button and says yes. A human on the loop is, the system maybe is still automated, but the human monitors the outputs, maybe certain outputs. In some cases, a human may need to have the ability to shut down a high-risk system that's not performing. So like a kill switch, if you think about AI systems in human safety use cases. And then in the extreme, think about a fully autonomous weaponized system that is known to be malfunctioning in some way. There needs to be a kill switch, right? AI can be narrow for specific tasks, or general, exhibiting intelligence similar to humans or the same as humans. And then there's super intelligence. And of course, that's what many AI technologists fear. But of course, some of those same people are expending enormous resources to achieve a goal of super intelligence. And you can think of Palantir and some of the others who have openly stated that's what their goals are, and OpenAI, I believe, as well. Now, general purpose AI can be used horizontally, multiple use cases, different industries, and generative AI is most often general purpose, right? But AI systems that are not generative AI also can be general purpose. And that becomes important because, well, we'll come back to why that becomes important, but understanding the use and purpose is very important when we're looking at compliance and we're trying to understand the risks of AI use. So when you hear about generative AI, LLMs, LMMs, you might also hear reference to inference or reasoning models. And that's important and really a newer development, because in reasoning models, the model can provide the steps that system took to achieve an output. And it can provide explainability, which becomes very important and when looking at risks and compliance. But there's really also a fundamental change in the way these models, these LLMs, are being trained to actually teach them how to reason. And we don't need to go into detail, but that's really also one of the things that's changing how these systems can operate. In the 2010s, we had some software, risk and compliance software, that we integrated with IBM and Archer risk management platforms. And it was interesting then because we started working with the Watson people. And but the problem at that time, and that was around the time after Jeopardy, after Watson was on Jeopardy, the companies didn't want to move their data up to the cloud. At that point, there wasn't the confidence in the cloud, and and that was required to do anything with Watson. But also, Watson was a black box. Literally, there was at that time no explanation of outputs from Watson. And of course, reasoning models are one way to overcome that black box problem. Another consideration with AI systems is the level of memory. And that can also be important with risks, privacy, security. A reactive machine does not have any memory regarding the input data after the system output. An AI system that input is from that data is forgotten. So some machines have limited memory. For example, an AI system that remembers the session information, but only as long as that session lasts. And other systems can remember input data, including generative AI systems. So anything that you put into the prompt, they will remember. Another distinction between AI that's important is whether it's a rules-based system. And a rules-based system is just that. It includes a set of rules that dictate the outputs. Those rules can be, sometimes that's called symbolic AI. And an example of one technique that's used a lot of times in a rule-based system is decision tree, if you're familiar with that. Machine learning systems are trained, of course, on the data, and they are considered sub-symbolic because they primarily rely on the numerical results and the algorithm. So, there's systems where rules-based systems work better, and there are circumstances where sub-symbolic systems need to be used. Vision is one example. If you think about an autonomous vehicle, and we'll come back to this, but it would be impossible to set up a series of rules to instruct a vehicle on all the different possible circumstances that it could encounter on the road. So in reality, most of these systems are hybrid. They take things from both. There's some machine learning, and they might include embedded rules like restrictions on input to generative AI models that will prevent the model from responding to queries like, how do I build a bomb, or something like that, or whatever, something else the company doesn't want that generative AI system used for. And then on the screen, we also have some of the different outputs. One thing to remember is classification uses historical data. It's supervised. So you have a column in your spreadsheet that has the result. The customer paid or didn't pay, the customer churned or didn't churn based on all of the other circumstances. And then you are making those predictions based on classification system. Clustering is unsupervised. So that's where you're finding those patterns, looking for anomalies in payment data or in network traffic. And then recommenders do just that. And think of in healthcare like a clinical decision support system that recommends a diagnosis and treatments based on profile and symptoms, et cetera. And then, of course, we've got generative AI. So long time on that slide. I won't take as long on other slides, but there's a lot of terminology if we can go to the next one. So, and again, I don't expect everyone to remember all of this, but we'll come back to a lot of these subjects in the future courses. Here, we're just trying to show the anatomy of a system. And to evaluate the risk and compliance of AI, you need to be able to define the boundaries. The system does not stand alone. It's used in a process. It's embedded in a platform. It's adjacent to other systems or operations. And an AI system used in business to really understand the combination of scope, the purpose, and the use. So generative AI, we talked about that as general purpose. It could be used to assist in creating marketing materials, and then someone else can use it to create a legal strategy document when that system is maybe not intended to be used for that purpose. Some of the AI regulation, of course, is also taking this risk-based approach. We'll, of course, come back to that. The EU AI Act and the Colorado AI Act take this approach. Specific uses are high risk and therefore regulated at a different level. But also remember, an AI system may be high risk because it is to the organization. It's performing some critical functions or operations. This graphic on the right is meant to just really highlight that there are system inputs, processing, and outputs. And processing is not only just the operation of an algorithm, there's pre-processing, there's post-processing. All of this is necessary to arrive at an output. And then with the ML model, of course, there's an iterative process because there's the development of the model and the training of the model, and then the deploying of the model where production data is used at that point. So we've got training and test data during the development stage, and then production data in the deployment stage. Next slide. Thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit about neural networks and computer vision because it's so important to so many things. The image on the left is a really highly simplified neural network. The nodes are artificial neural network in this network are they're numeric values basically. So typically like 0 to 1. And the operation of this network, it really depends on the design of the system. It can be tuned based on weights and other factors. And we're not here to go into all the technical aspects of backward propagation and those things, but here's just a really simple example. That's our dog, Pakun. And to completely oversimplify it again, the network IDs, the pixels, the edges, the edge combinations, the feature combinations, and then finally you get an output: dog, breed, have, and ease. And if you're familiar, many of the early AI object identification systems were trained on these vast data sets where people label these images: dog, cat, or different kinds of birds, etc. So, but let's look then at the self-driving vehicle example, because it is a really interesting one. It's talked about a lot. So, but hopefully I give you maybe a little different perspective on it here. If you can imagine a self-driving vehicle on autopilot pulls up at the intersection with instructions to turn right. So, it's important to note that the car has a number of different systems. It's identifying the objects, and then it has to decide how to deal with them, etc. The self-driving car, it recognizes these objects, people, maybe that this one object is a stroller, and hopefully it understands, and I'm using quotes, that the intersection has to be clear before before the car can make the turn, of course. But you have to consider, does the vehicle understand anything? Does it matter if it's a mailbox or a lamppost, or just, hey, the vehicle needs to avoid those objects? But now consider, if you come up and drive up to this intersection as a human, you pull up to the intersection, make a right-hand turn, you bring all your understanding and context of the situation. So you're waiting to make the turn, you observe that she's distracted, she's got the phone, the dog, the stroller. Maybe the dog will stay there, maybe the dog will move forward with her, maybe she'll pull on the dog's leash. You don't know, but all of these things might come through your mind as you're sitting there and looking at this situation, all again in the thought of, okay, what's going to happen next? When will this clear? When can I make my right-hand turn? So quick thought experiment that comes up a lot in AI. You think about a driving car with only two options: hit a dog, hit a human, run into a child or an adult, hit a tree, possibly injuring the driver, or hit a group of people walking on the side of the road. What are the potential liabilities based on that decision? These are questions. There's not a lot of clear answers, but there have been vehicular manslaughter cases filed based on self-driving cars. So we'll probably come back to some of that. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through this really quickly. NLP is really fundamental, but just to be clear, it's a set of techniques to understand and manipulate and to generate human language. And it's really, of course, closely related to other areas that we look at, speech recognition and other AI systems. So a lot of times that's where NLP comes in. And optical character recognition, also very important, fundamental. It's been around for a while. And in the 2000s, I used it in IP litigation. We didn't call it AI. We were just scanning massive numbers of documents for discovery, actually millions of documents. And then we were using OCR to digitize those and machine translations because a lot of these documents were not in English. Just to be clear, and LLMs, generative AI, is sort of stepping in where NLP is, and there's some differences. I'm not going to go through all those differences, but there are differences. But the fact is that these NLP technologies are still used for a lot of different things because there's some benefits to using it over an LLM. So many of those techniques are still used for sentiment analysis, text classification, categorization, et cetera. So next slide.
Brian, thank you so much for the overview of AI use cases. I'm especially excited about all the AI productivity tools and accessibility tools that, for example, use computer vision. But in the words of a famous philosopher, with great power comes great responsibility. Would you like to talk about AI risks?
Right. So, I mean, this is a slide that I've used actually for a long time. And the reason is because companies focus on the benefits and the business case is made on the benefits, and hopefully there's a process to measure those benefits. But we all know there's unique risks that need to be accounted for. Unfortunately, it falls to the attorneys and the risk managers sometimes to remind people, to remind developers and users about the AI risks. So this is just a sampling of the risks. And this is, again, a precursor to what we'll come back to in future courses. But on the right, we've got some of the AI legal risks. Litigation and state federal enforcement actions is increasing. We've seen that. We talked about that in our last course we did two weeks ago that Jonathan talked about. There are more eyes on AI now. So if things go wrong, there's more chance for disputes and litigation. AI contract risks, I'm just going to mention a couple of these. Your vendors are using generative AI and other AI systems now internally. Do you know about it? Have allocation of AI risks? Has that been something that's been reviewed in contracts? The IP space. Hopefully everyone knows not to take trade secrets and put them in the DeepSeek engineering prompt. But there are a lot of other issues around IP as well. People are familiar with copyright issues with AI. Recent cases, Thomson Reuters versus Ross Intelligence. It's a great example where Ross used Westlaw content to train its AI legal tool, and Ross was found to be infringing. That essentially put them out of business. So consider all of the Ross customers and what they had to do to find alternative tools. Next slide. Here, I'm just really going to highlight sort of the arc of AI standards, over the last 10 years. Ethical use was something that was talked about in the beginning. What is ethical AI use? But even if there's known ethical principles or agreed ethical principles, the viewpoints just diverge between countries, communities, companies. Culture and value come into play. Trustworthy AI is about trusted AI systems. We'll come back to that. Responsible AI became the next iteration. That's about responsible uses, assessing systems to ensure they're not misused, that they're functioning properly. And one key point to remember here is that all of these frameworks really cover some of the same pillars or principles. Sometimes they do it in a different way. And we'll come back in the next course and talk more about some of the frameworks. Go to the next slide, please. These are some of the common principles you see for AI ethics. And it's important to just consider how it fits in with your company ethics. the tone from the top and all of that. Company ethics programs need to be aligned with AI uses. That's important. They need to be, AI ethics needs to be integrated with overall corporate governance and ethics. Maybe an ethics committee is needed. Maybe an ethics committee exists, but needs to be assigned responsibility for reviewing ethical decisions with AI uses, and a process for taking that information and escalating it to them needs to be provided. We haven't talked a lot about bias, but one of the things we're talking about here is unwanted bias or illegal discrimination, because we know that systems can pass the 4/5 rule in employment, if you're familiar with that, and be considered compliant or legal, if you will. And I'm using that loosely, but companies might want to introduce biases. So an AI system may be still legally compliant, but the company, for its own purposes, for example, to increase hiring of a particular group, might want to introduce biases that still don't break those rules. Next slide, please. I skipped over the ABA formal rule opinion 512 on the last slide. That's not a real focus of this course, but you should be obviously aware of it, because those are legal obligations. I know there are a lot of attorneys that are on the call right now. So this is going to be the meat of what we talk about this in the next couple slides in really the next course. Governance, the act or process of overseeing and controlling the direction of something. And then really we need to look at how corporate governance fits in with data governance and AI governance. And by AI governance, we're really talking about those policies, procedures, ethical considerations that are required to oversee the development, deployment, and maintenance of AI systems. And that's a definition that comes from Palo Alto Networks. There are others, but it's about ensuring that those AI risks have been identified and addressed, including, of course, compliance and legal risks. And that's where we'll dive in. There are a number of frameworks. Two of the most important ones are ISO and NIST, but there are others. These are the ones that are most widely adopted. And one of the distinctions that you should recognize is that ISO 42001 is an auditable standard, and there is a mechanism to employ independent auditors and get audited against that standard, similar to ISO 27001 and some of the other ISO standards. NIST is voluntary, but it is widely used by companies, and we'll talk about both of those much more in the next course. Next slide. Again, here, I just want to sort of highlight a few things, because this will be the subject of our next course. Really what we're looking at here is trying to understand the risks. What is the probability that something will happen? And what is the impact? And by risk, generally, we talk about, there can be upside or downside risks. We talk mostly about downside risks. That is the risk that something is going to have a negative impact on a company, for example. But really, this formula here that's in blue, or the risk formula here, it's about what's the likelihood of an event. For example, something bad happening with an AI system, harmful results, and what's the severity of the potential consequences of that event. And one of the things that we'll find with AI is that understanding AI risk, probability and impact can be difficult. We can calculate fines and we can look at some of those things, but the magnitude of some of these impacts are difficult to quantify. That's one of the things that we'll find. But ultimately, the goal is to get those residual risks within a risk tolerance or appetite. That is something that can be accepted by top management. And last slide, please. So I'm not really going to talk about this slide too much because this is really some of the guts of the courses going forward, of course. But you can see a lot of the things. These are some of the same topics that we discussed 2 weeks ago in terms of what's happening in 2025 and what companies should do to prepare themselves. And as we go through these courses in the AI Masterclass series, we'll hit on a number of these and, in particular courses, and some will come up again and again in other courses. So looking forward to that and looking forward to our future courses. Diana?
Oh. Can you hear me? Sorry. Thank you so
Yes.
much for the insightful webinar, Brian. I'm sure everybody will walk away having learned something new. And before we move on to the Q&A session, we would like to invite you to our next webinar, our next masterclass on March 18th, where we will talk about AI governance basics and the current AI risk management best practices, frameworks, and governance models. Please be on the lookout for the email invitation.
Thanks, Diana. Thanks, Brian. We've gotten to the point, we've got a few minutes left. Good timing to get things wrapped by 1:30. We do have a question, a really good one. Brian, I think this is going to go directly to you. Do you have any insights into any potential legal issues related to self-hosting of DeepSeek rather than using the basic cloud?
So, I mean, I have a lot of insights on that, but I don't know all the details of a DeepSeek deployment, and context is everything. So it's all about how you're deploying it. And, one of the things obviously to look at is all of those same things that we typically as lawyers need to look at, their policies, their privacy policies, their disclaimers, everything in the contract, the terms, where is your data going? We talked about systems that remember and don't. Where is your data going? So there are a lot of different issues, and really anytime you're approaching that kind of a situation where you're looking to deploy a generative AI solution, whether it's DeepSeek or any others, you need to go through a structured process and understand, identify all of the different risks and look at what you need to do to mitigate those risks. And if there's risk remaining, how then can you accept that as a company? Can upper management accept that as a company? So, glad to talk more about some of the details, but these are really context sensitive, the specific generative AI model and how it's being deployed and all of the terms around that deployment. And so, more for you to look at, and we're glad to help if you want to, talk a little bit more about what are some of those things that you really need to be focusing in on.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, and I think that's a good segue to just mention. Feel free to reach out. Contact Brian. Everybody should have his email address. If not, we can certainly share it. If you have a question you want to engage after the event, I'm sure Brian would be very happy to entertain any questions you have. We have a little more time, so I've got another question here, and I think I'll just preview this one. I think it's going to be addressed in future sessions. But the question is, do you have some general legal aspects that we need to keep an eye out for in our AI service agreements to our clients and with the providers and vendors of potentially, solutions that incorporate AI at some point?
Right. Well, I always tell companies and advise them that as part of your vendor assessment process And hopefully, depending on your situation and again, the context, you have a policy to do that you've looked at these AI risks and been able to identify them. So when you go through that process of assessing and then reviewing the contract and understanding what you can and cannot accept in that contract, then you have that background and you understand what you need to look at, where risk shifting needs to occur, where your company can accept certain risks, maybe where you have insurance or other coverage that you can deal with those risks. And so we will be talking about that in a number of the other courses, and we have some courses that are really dedicated in that space, including, and Diana, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, we have a workshop where we're going to bring people together and we're going to talk about some of those kinds of things as well, and work on and talk about some of the language and clauses and things like that. So you might be interested in attending that one.
So Brian, if I were to summarize, it's you need to develop the foundation. You need your own framework for assessing your company's risk parameters, its tolerances, the things that your company that are unique to your company need to be aware of, and then applying that framework to whatever contract you are negotiating or potentially seeking to enter into, whether it's with a customer or with another vendor, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to start somewhere, and the foundation is really where we need to start. We have more.
Absolutely. And you know what? Maybe you should answer that question because that was a great summary.
uh, we have some more questions, so bear with me. Do we expect the use of artificial intelligence during an attorney's workflow to increase? I'm happy to answer that one.
Go ahead.
So the answer is absolutely. It's already happening. Um, you know, some firms have adopted utilization of AI to uh, accelerate certain repetitive processes. So I think we are already well aware that machine learning has been a part of research, data organization and filtering. I think with the advent of generative AI over the past couple of years, we're talking more about, are more lawyers from Morgan and Morgan going to get in hot water for using AI to, create briefs from the ground up, to create motions from the ground up, to potentially hallucinate and make up cases and case law and get sanctioned for it. All those things are happening. It's in the news. I think that any professional services firm that isn't actively evaluating and implementing AI at certain parts of the process are falling behind the times. So I think it's going to increase. We may have an essay that'll be released in the near future that talks about some of the considerations that in-house counsel would want to have with respect to their own in-house utilization of AI. The fear that we're going to get to a point where clients are doing their own legal analyses, coming out with decisions, and just going to their outside counsel and saying, can you rubber stamp what we just determined? Can you validate this output? I always say to that question, sure we can, but we're going to have to redo what you did because we don't know all of the facts that you used in your inputs. So I think there's going to be a lot of surprises with respect to how AI is utilized. And I think some of the efficiencies that people perceive may not be as efficient as you think they are. So we can certainly delve into that. I'm not sure if we have a masterclass specific to legal practice, but if it's not on one of the nearly dozen that we have, it's certainly one we should consider. Speaking of future
Right.
courses,
Thanks.
we are at the end of the time. Last question: Will there be future courses covering anything international? Most of what we're seeing right now is federal and state at the U.S. level. Are we going to touch upon something international in the future? And Brian, I'll let you just respond to that.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll talk about the UAI Act, we'll talk about GDPR, and we'll talk about some of the other laws that are out there in APAC region and in other areas as well.
Great. All right, thanks everybody. And we are now at 1:31, so we will end the first of our lengthy series of master classes. So thank you for everybody that stayed online for the entire event. Look forward to having you join us for the next one.
Thanks for
Thank you.
joining.
Thanks everyone.